Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I'm also the host of Moms Don't Have Time to Lose Weight, and I'm the editor of the anthology, which you should run out and buy, called Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. All proceeds of that book go to COVID-19 vaccine research. And I'm the editor-in-chief of Moms Don't Have Time to Write, a new publication on Medium, and we're accepting submissions, so please send your personal essays there. And if all that isn't enough, you can follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens, and my website is zibbyowens.com. Okay, now back to this amazing podcast. Anna Q is the author of Made in China, a memoir of love and labor. Anna is a Chinese-American writer whose work has appeared in the Three Penny Review, Lumina, Cartica Review, Quelly Journal, Volume 1, Brooklyn, and elsewhere. She holds an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College and lives in Brooklyn. This is her first book. Welcome, Anna. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Made in China, a memoir of love and labor.
Hi, Zibby. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. This is my first podcast interview. Yeah.
I feel like publicists put me first for a lot of authors because it's like very, it's like a gentle, warm, gentle, introduction or something.
That's great. I like that.
So everybody else will ask you this as well. So you might as well have a good answer ready. But what is your book about?
Thank you for asking. Well, Made in China, Memoir of Love and Labor is my first book. It's a memoir. And, it really centers around one single moment. And it's the perceived betrayal of pulling child services on my family after they put me to work at their sweatshop in Queens, New York. And so the book opens in the factory, and then we sort of figure out how I got there. And then the second half of the book really centers around when I write to child services for the records and, what happens once I find those records.
Wow. Well, your book was beautiful. I love the way you write because it's not like you don't waste words, right? There's no unnecessary flourishes, and yet it's still literary and beautiful, and it really puts you right in all of these situations, right? Right whether you're running around barefoot in your neighborhood in China before you moved, or you're, in college, making the phone call, all these moments are so clear. And I think that's where the best writing comes, right? When you can just completely put yourself in, but you're not totally distracted by the language. So anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was sort of, that's actually been a huge goal of mine to really, allow the language to tell the story. And I also spent a lot of time, I think, working on it so it wasn't as sentimental as it maybe originally started out to be.
Interesting. Well, I just wanted to read an example.
Yeah,
there are a couple passages that were they were all really great, but let me read this one. It says, okay, "It is not my rage, but my mother's that hits me sometimes, an inheritance that the women in my family bear each day. We swallow parts of ourselves, instinctively neutralizing ourselves to fit the mold society has put us in. We are working women whose stories hold little value, women whose stories are not believed, women whose stories do not matter. All three generations of my family, starting with my grandmother, and probably going back further than that, were taught to be daughters, childbearers, caregivers, and laborers, women born to carry more than their weight. Untethered anger stirs in all of us and eventually becomes a tight ball of bitterness and resentment, handed down generation after generation, a rage that hides the fear of being forgotten, of being less than, of being obsolete. I can tell the weight isn't solely mine, the way I can tell when someone having a bad day suddenly snaps and transfers their mood to me. When it comes, it's a tidal wave, and the impact takes out everything in its path." Wow.
Thank you.
Great. Oh my gosh. Also your mother's rage and your mother's moods and her parenting that's something that, as you admit in the book, you have to wrestle with every day. And that has affected all of your relationships going forward, especially the fact that you had these two half siblings who got completely different treatment. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things for me as a child was really witnessing how much they were treated differently, better. So I, I couldn't do better than them in school. They had an allowance when I didn't. And then, it was just also became very complex. So, when my stepfather had business meetings where the entire family was invited, I was often left out. And what that meant was like everything around it. Right. So obviously, my mom going and shopping and buying them outfits for the said event, and then the preparation, and then, them leaving in the car. And I'm just kind of hanging out alone in the house. And, it was really hard to watch that, to know that there was this other side of my family that I just could not access. And yet, I think as a young child, luckily I was raised by my grandparents. I knew that I deserved a love, and I knew what love was. And so, part of the reason I fought so hard when I was young, and I, maybe in a lot of ways escalating the situation myself, was because I wanted something that just did not belong to me, and I just didn't understand why.
I'm so sorry that this happened. I wanted to go back in your story and have you just stay with your grandparents, yeah. And even the moment with this one particularly intimate moment with your stepfather and what happened when you tried to talk about it, and the reaction of your whole extended family, and, and then he's still your stepfather. What do you do with something like that?
Yeah, actually my perspective on my stepfather has really changed since I started writing this book. Because as a child, I didn't see any cruelty come from him in any way. And so all I wanted was his love. All I pined for was his attention. But again, that was something my mother made very clear was not mine. So in my child's eye, he could do no wrong. And so if I had a savior, it would have been him. But, really spending so much time working on this book and really thinking about how, this conversation is so, I think, relevant, but just complacency, right? Of just a parent who allows their partner to abuse their child. And, and also really questioning how good that person really is, and what their responsibilities are. So I think just the way I write his character really changed, and I'm sure no one who knows him would be happy with how I wrote him, but I think from my perspective I think a lot of this book is about responsibility, so I felt like I had to also point to that as well.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
When you look back on those conversations you had with Mrs. V, I think that's what you called her, who's the one who eventually sort of that's not the wrong word, intervened on your behalf and helped call child services and all of that. What do you make of that whole situation? Because it so easily could have not happened, right? You could have just stayed and all of that. Are you in touch with, what's the ending of the story? What do you think about it when all the time you've had to process for writing this book and everything?
Yeah, I actually tried to find her as I was writing the book and to thank her. So I actually called the school a couple of times and I sent a couple of emails. And from what I understand, she's no longer working. I think she's retired. And it was really funny because I think the person on the phone or email was just kind of like, I'm sure she knows that you're grateful. And I was like, okay. Yes, thanks. So yeah, I would love to have just spoken to her as an adult to kind of get a sense of what she remembered and how she remembers it.
Maybe she'll find this book in a bookstore and have this big connection. There'll be a big...
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Okay, if that happens, you have to post it and then tag me in the back so I know or something. Because I'm I would really love to hear if that happens.
Maybe she's listening to this podcast.
Maybe she's listening. Wow, that would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, she, I think, and the bilingual social worker, Mary, in this book, really changed my life. And it's so funny because I think perhaps it was just another day for both of them, but it was just such a colossal, massive change for me. And Yeah. And even the person that helped me become financially like independent in college so that I could go to
Yep.
college. I remember him and I just remember like crying hysterically after because I was just so happy that this was happening. And it even in that moment, like I knew that I was able to get Mary to sign this letter and I was going to college because I'd called child services on my family. And so even that, it just got really complicated. And I had a sense of what I had done for myself. And I always believed that, one of the bravest things I ever did was call child services on my family because it really changed my life. But that also meant when I received the records from child services, I was so devastated. It just felt like a truck hit me, and I had just been living a lie for the last, I think at that point it was over 15 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And are you in touch with, so the grandparents are your mom's parents, right?
Yeah, I'm not in touch with really anyone from my father's side. And that gets also pretty complicated. My mother was really angry with them because after my father died, they didn't really help her very much.
Okay.
So when she remarried, she just cut us off from them. And I actually found them again relatively recent through 23andMe of all things. So there's some sort of relationship now, but it's, I don't even have a relationship with my mother right now. So it's, yeah.
So do you have family ties? Do you feel good about anyone like in your family? I know you had gone back. Well, you tell me. Like, do you have support? Are you okay? Like, do you have, like, where's your emotional support coming from?
I am okay. I don't have family support. I don't have emotional support from my family in pretty much any way. I don't have financial support from my family in any way. And, that's been a really hard, really devastating part of the process for me. And I think, writing this book I can't say that it's made it worse, but I think it's allowed them to have a reason not to, be in touch with me or not to sort of be more understanding about where I'm coming from. But I'm not, I've lived this life for 37 years now. So I also know that if I didn't write this book, nothing would change. The book doesn't change anything. So yeah, I mean, I haven't seen my mother since before 2015. I often wonder how she's doing and how she's aging. And she's actually really close. I'm in Brooklyn and I'm in Park Slope and she's in Whitestone, Queens. But yeah, there's just something we can't bridge with one another. And, if I had to point to it and say what it was, I would say it's that she never put me as a priority in her life, and she continues to be firm about where my placement is in her life. So that's very difficult for me, and just to consistently be treated so differently from my other siblings. And luckily, I'm in a place in my life where, I'm so very fortunate to have, grown up here, to have been able to get an education, go to college, go to grad school, because without it, I would have been dependent on her. And if I didn't call child services, I don't know what my life would have been like. I think it's possible that I would have kept working at the factory, and it's possible that, I would never have gotten to where I am today. Yeah, because a lot of the freedom at that time when I was 15, 16, I wasn't allowed to go over at a friend's house. My friends weren't able to visit me. I could never go out, and all I did was like home, factory, school. And after Mary got involved, she loosened her very tight hold on me. So that was great. Like I stopped working at the factory. Mary also knew a lot more. It was also really difficult to navigate. So, I mean, I am an immigrant, but my parents are also immigrants. I'm the first child. So they really didn't know a lot of things. So, for example, I didn't even know I could get a part-time job, whether there was a part-time job posting at my high school. And it was Mary who told me to go and look. And that's how I found my first job in the real world. But that really, that allowed me freedom. And Mary convinced my mother to allow me to keep the money I earned for the very first time. She encouraged her to come with me to a local bank and open up an account so that I could start saving that money. Like those were just huge milestones that I could not have been able to just get out of my mother on my own. It had to be a third person. But it's really, because of all of that, that really, I am where I am today.
Wow. And what about your relationship with your half siblings, Jilly and Henry?
Yeah, I don't have much of a relationship with them. And actually, I was very, very kind of been thinking about writing about it, but I haven't. But my brother got married a couple of years ago, and I wasn't invited to the wedding. So that was really devastating to find out from, no, not my immediate family. And then I tried to send gifts and I texted my brother, and both my siblings don't really respond to me, but he ended up responding, and I said I wanted to send him a gift. Could he send me his address? And he wouldn't even give me his address. He gave me my parents' address. And I was like, are you still living at home? And he said, yes, but I know that that's not true. So, he didn't even want to give me his address so I could send a gift for his wedding. Yeah. And then, they got pregnant, had a kid. And again, it's just, I asked a very simple question, is it a boy or a girl? And I was like, oh, it's a boy. I'm like, what's his name? And, they wouldn't tell me his name. So,
Anna, I am so sorry. I don't know in what planet they feel like this is okay or how they rationalize it to themselves. It is so cruel and terrible. Yeah. And I am just so sorry that this is the family you were born into. And I am glad you've been able to find some way to process and that you're sharing your story with the rest of the world. But it's just really heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I actually, there's so much that was left out of the book. And I'm so conscious of sort of the cycle of trauma that it was really important to me that I didn't relay that trauma to the readers as well. So, I really thought about what needs to go in the book. And there's a lot of things that didn't go into the book because I didn't think it served the story. And I didn't want to overwhelm the book with the sort of abuse that I had to deal with. And that wasn't, why I wrote the book. So, yeah.
Was there something particularly awful that you didn't want to put in that you want to tell me? You don't have to.
No, I think there's just, actually I read the foreword for Autobiography of a Face, which is one of my favorite books. And I remember Lucy Gleary, who is the author.
That was so good, by the way.
Yeah, amazing. So good.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And she, she talks about protecting the reader and not having to share the worst thing that happened to you to be able to tell a story. And I'm a firm believer in that. So, yeah, so a lot of the choices to keep this book balanced was an effort. The tender moments in this book took me a long time to sort of find and flesh out. I think the two key moments are, when my mother comes to the first graduation, to my first graduation, and it happens to be, grad school. She had never come to a single graduation before, but she came and it was like she was standing up for me. Like this was, her fighting the world for me. And there's just so much distance between us. It's really, really difficult. So I know she feels like the victim in a lot of ways. And I think they feel like they're protecting themselves from me in a lot of ways. And, there's not really any way around that. I don't really have any other family. So this is sort of what I've got.
Wow. It's just amazing. So do you have like there must have been someone, or maybe not, who was some sort of external mentor to you, or like, well, how did you end up getting the guide? Like, how did you end up? I know you went to grad school and got an MFA and all that. Like, when did you know that the writing would be some sort of salvation to you? And did you have some teacher or somebody who was like, you're really good at this, or keep going, or anyone who you're like, thank you so much, here's the book, or is there anyone like that, or are you just like totally renegade, on your own doing it?
Yeah, I actually have never thought I was a very good writer, and no instructor, no professor has ever told me that, actually.
What?
Yeah. It's all the story, and writing this has always felt like a vocation. It didn't really, like, I did try to run away from it. I didn't really want to be a writer just because I needed financial support. And it's just, something that I really struggle with, having left home at 17, 18. And so, my sense of stability was really so centered around being able to provide for myself, which is also why I thought it, really works to have labor in this book, and how our identities are so close to, our place in our family, and then our place in where we end up with work as well, and the dynamics there. And yeah, so.
Wow.
But yeah, I went to Binghamton for undergrad because it was the best school for the cheapest price that I could go. And grad school was a huge gift to myself. I wanted to be confident. I wanted to know about craft. I wanted to, learn. I wanted to become a writer. And I've always struggled with it. English isn't my first language. I still make grammatical mistakes all the time. I don't know why, but I do. And yeah, unless something really affects me and I can't let it go, I don't usually write about it. And now, with the book coming out, I'm really hoping that I could change the way I work. I'm trying to get into teaching full time. So we'll see, but I'm really excited about this new path. I think it's going to be much better for me than being an office manager at some startup where I, break down 25 boxes in a day and put out snacks. And I'm like, oh, I think a monkey could do this.
Have you been in touch at all, or do you have any events planned with Jean Kwok, who wrote Searching for Sylvie Lee? I'm going to introduce you after this.
Yes,
she's amazing. She's a best-selling author. She actually lives in the Netherlands right now because she married somebody from there. But her book is set in Queens. It's an immigrant story. Her parents worked at the dry cleaner. It's fiction, but it's based on her life. And I think, and she's a little bit older. Well, maybe not. Anyway, I think you guys should talk. I think she should moderate an event for you or something if you have something coming up.
That would be cool.
Maybe through your publicist, you could send me your email or something like that, and I'll connect the two of you, because she contributed to my anthology, and I just adore her. So
amazing.
I feel like she would be I feel like you need a role model, like a mentor. Like, I feel like I want to give you a guide or somebody to help. Not that you need it. And maybe it's too like mothering of an instinct of me, but I don't know. I want to like give you a hug and like to have somebody tell you that like you're not alone. It's amazing what you've been able to do. And this book is fantastic. And I really hope that tons of people read it and learn your story, and that you feel that the outpouring of affection and goodwill and all of that comes from what the readers will undoubtedly feel after reading. So
yeah, I hope so. When I was working on this book, I held it so close to my chest before I sent it out to, agents. Maybe 2 of my friends had read it, like no one had read it. And so, I worked on it for almost 10 years. And I just wanted it to be mine. And I didn't want to think about the readers. And I didn't want to think about, editing it to anybody else's feedback. But now it's really exciting to see it reach the world. This is a story that not a lot of people know about. I don't talk about it. I think it's part of the assimilation, and I think there's some shame around it as well. Just, I've never felt like I could really talk about what was happening at home, even with other Asian other Asian friends. And so that was always difficult for me. And, when you're young and you're, in college, the kids didn't know what to do. They couldn't really help me. They didn't know how to deal with it. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, what advice would you have for aspiring authors?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say keep working on what you're working on until you get it right. And it's a very long process, and, it takes years. And also know that that's part of the best process when you're working on it alone, before other people get involved in your book, before readers get to read it too.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Anna, thank you so much. And we'll stay in touch, and I'll put you guys together. And I'm really so rooting for you here when this book comes out.
Thank you so much. This has been so great.
Okay.
Bye, Zibby.
Okay. Bye. Congrats on doing your first interview. See, not so bad, right?
Great. It went great. I didn't cry. Excellent.
Excellent. Check plus.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.